are happy, let us be happy together. Whether the weather is cloudy or sunny, I will always be your funny honey bunny. I am lucky, you are lucky, let us get lucky together. Whether the weather is cloudy or breezy, I'll be there to say, hey, come on, let's take it easy. 'Cause isn't it nice to have the friends that you do? And isn't it nice that the sky is so blue? And isn't it nice to say I love you, chugga chugga choo choo, woo woo. I am smiling, you are smiling, let us smile together. Whether the weather is cloudy or stormy, I will still be there in the morning. I'll be right by your side in the morning. I'll make you breakfast in the morning. I hope that you like cereal.
Yay!
Yay! So, yeah, you got to actually play it for Philip this time. I had to do a little bit of like live mixing, but it worked. That said, first of all, two happy ending elements, and one of them pertains to our question right here. Ed's 3D Tech is saying, can you ask Philip if the Russian army is surrounded in a certain place and about to surrender in large numbers? That's I'm like, tell everybody about that. That's Kherson.
So there's a pocket just southeast of Kherson where there's a counteroffensive going on to recapture Kherson. Now, Kherson fell at the beginning of the war from very dubious, from really a lot of very questionable elements, in that what a lot of people think was actually Russia's overall plan for the entirety of Ukraine, which was to have people inside Ukraine who would then open the door and let them just march on in. And it did work in Kherson. And but Kherson is about 77% Ukrainian.
Yeah.
Ethnically Ukrainian. And so they have, since the beginning of the war, or the grander war, since February 24th, have been conducting a lot of not overtly like partisan warfare, but they have been very much subverting Russia's power there. And now there is this pocket of about 800 Russian soldiers who have been cut off and encircled at a little area about, I want to say it's about 70 miles southeast from Kherson, and they cannot reconnect with Russia, with the rest of the Russian forces in the east. And they're either gonna have to break out and connect, or they're going to have to surrender. There have been requests for what's called a green corridor to let them, like was given to Ukrainians, to be fair, around Mariupol. But you know, they're not.
Yeah, that's different though.
They're stuck.
That's letting soldiers reconnect with other soldiers is different than creating a corridor so that civilians can leave. These are not. That's a wholly different thing. And the idea that
wounded soldiers, or
that's fine. Yeah, if they need to get people to like military evac, absolutely. I mean, talk about a good faith, gesture. Yeah, remove your wounded.
letting them out so they can reconnect with Russia's main military force and then turn around and fight you again. No.
Yeah, so Alexei Arestovich, the advisor to the head of the president's office, confirmed the encirclement of a group of Russian troops in the Kherson region and the Yevskopol region. He spoke about this during a live broadcast with Mark Fagan. We partially took Olgino and almost completely Potemkino. These are two settlements to the right and left of Yevskopol. I'm going to go with that. Is Yevskopol. So they're, in fact, a repetition of Ivansk for the Russian troops because they are about 1,000 fighters with weapons and military equipment. They are in tactical environment. Yesterday, there was their attempt to break out from that was suppressed by our fire. They returned back and were surrounded by three-quarters with fire and control of the only exit. They are stuck, and they're saying there's about 1,000 in there, and they've got gear. Yeah. Yes, I said medical evac, just to clarify, Stefan, if I misspoke, I apologize. The situation is mirrored in Yovansk, the Russian command, and there is, this is a quote from them, treacherously violated the agreement and shot at our troops. We have a very big temptation to bury them all in this cauldron. But firstly, we are fighting differently than the Russians. We do not break our word. Secondly, I think that the high humane armed forces of Ukraine will simply offer them to surrender. this will be the best way out for them to surrender their weapons and equipment to stay alive. This is a war, and no one will fuss. We will not provide a corridor. If they do not want to surrender, their fate will be decided. I mean, it's a war. You invaded a country. If you're not going to surrender once you're encircled, your option, I suppose, as an invading force, is to go down swinging. And
they're so deep. They're so deep in Ukrainian. Ultimately, they're so deep in Ukrainian territory, which, because the Russians have emphasized the Donbass so much, because that's ultimately what they really have been fixated on.
Right.
That when Ukraine is doing a counteroffensive in Kherson, that they have got these 800, 1,000 soldiers basically cut off from, and there's no force pushing in to give them relief or to create a corridor. They're screwed. Sorry, but they're screwed.
Yes.
And then there's so much is going on right now where we haven't even seen the full counteroffensive yet, and already we're seeing the Russians in really difficult situations, whether it's that pocket outside of Kherson, whether it is the announcement that we're going to be sending more HIMARS. I mean, Russia has been saying that they actually have destroyed HIMARS when we have pretty reliable information that that's not the case.
Right.
The tide, oh boy.
Yeah.
I don't like saying categorically this, but it does look like the tide is to switch.
Right.
And we'll have to see how it goes. But the Ukrainians have been suffering under the offensive of the Russians for the better part of the last 2 months, 3 months, when the Russians decided to pull back away from Kiev and to emphasize the Donbass. The Ukrainians have been taking it and taking it and taking it. And the entire time they have been getting everything in order for a counteroffensive. And
this encircling would be an example.
This is not the counteroffensive yet.
No, but the encircling of these troops, the liberating of territories that are even beyond where the troops are, which is effectively look at it as the line has been breached and they've been surrounded because the line was pushed back behind them. Is what happens when you undermine their ability to refit, resupply, and rearm their troops and give them materials, and they get stuck out there with no bullets, no rounds, no mortars. They've expended everything, and there's nothing to bring in. In a matter of time, they don't have the stores like the Ukrainians did that happened on their territory. And the Russians didn't think they needed it. Now there's a couple more questions, and we only got 4 minutes left.
Quick questions, and then I guess we're going to have to really go to questions after the radio. But let's go for it. Give me a question,
Johnny. Yeah.
All right. So the question that got pushed from last week from I don't know the name, but it reads like Peter Imbrat, is about the Antonovsky Bridge that the Ukraine just hit in Darvka. It's very important for Russian tanks and resupply.
There are three bridges. There are three bridges over the Dnieper, and the Russians have moved many of their forces to the western side of the river because that is actually part of what is the Kherson Oblast of Kherson. So what they are trying to do, the Russians, is to get Kherson Oblast to under the gun, like they did in Crimea, go for a referendum and take the entire oblast and say, well, we're now Russian, we voted for it, it's legit, even though the referendum would be under the gun. And because part of Kherson Oblast is on the western side of the river, they've actually inserted their forces on that side. But if the Ukrainians are able to cut them off from the river, because there are three bridges, well, there's two bridges and then there's the dam at the Dnieper. If they are able to cut the Russian forces off on the western side of the river, then they will have a pocket of maybe 3,000 Russian soldiers. And so there is talk of them destroying those bridges so that they can cut off the Russians on the western side of the river and then just basically do the same thing that they're doing at this pocket southeast of Kherson, which is to cut them off, surround them, and force them to either surrender or ultimately be destroyed.
Right. I mean, we're talking about a war, and a war of choice where they entered the country. These are the kind of things that are actually happening. And it's, again, why I don't wish violence on anybody on a personal level, because it's awful. It's always awful. No. But in these particular situations, this is the expectation that they should have. The irony is that they probably did not outfit their soldiers with enough stuff, because they overestimated their competence and their ability to take the country, because it was based largely on the ego of the people in charge instead of actual tactical decisions on the ground. Let's grab another question real quick. We only have a minute left, so let me use this minute to remind everybody that Philip is on Twitter at Philip Ittner, 1 L in Philip, 2 T's in Ittner. If you have any questions there, it's a good way to do it, and maybe we can set up a series on his YouTube channel where he can answer questions that people give him on his Twitter. You know what I mean? That, you can kind of go through, and that'd be an easy shoot for you to do. Build up some content. Here I am producing your show already. It's lovely. I'm so glad to help. And Johnny Million at Johnny Million. Without the one, you don't need a one on there anymore. It's the only Johnny Million you need. I'm at Hal Sparks. This is the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide. I'm here every Saturday. We live stream it as well at infotainmentwars.com and, of course, at twitch.tv/Hal Sparks and on my Facebook page. If you're on Facebook, God help you, but you can go to the Hal Sparks page and watch the show there as well and contribute. We will see you guys next week. Thank you, Chicago. And I am committed to solving my audio issues by next week. I will nail it. I'm going to. We're going to figure it out. We'll be back next week with Bite Air Audio. And scene. It's like juggling chainsaws while trying to do the show. And and quite frankly, I get it, I get so relaxed because my regular show. Thank you, Chicago. See you soon. We'll solve it this week. Devin and we'll hook up and solve it. I'll talk to you guys later.
Sounds good.
Okay. I get so used to doing my show, which I've worked out most of the kinks on. I mean, there's definitely issues here and there. But comparatively, it's nothing. And then I get spoiled by how well that works comparatively. And then when we start doing this, I'm like, and there goes my hand, and I gotta, doing the show one-handed. Can Hal juggle? Yes, I can. Nothing sharp though, because I play guitar, and that's just ridiculous.
I mean, I'm one of the primary reasons for going back to the States is to get all my ducks in a row and kind of refit and get new equipment and things like that, and then hopefully when I return, do this better.
Right? Yeah. Well, that's it. Yeah, but there's stuff is the availability of stuff is growing all the time. There's still some things that are outside the norm of even the prosumer stuff that's out there that you do have to take that one weird extra step still to this day. And like I said, the mix minus is always the biggest issue. Yeah. So I'm like, and I can see it affect even just having the browser open with the audio coming out of it affects the software that I use a little bit. And that's part of why we digitize, I think, maybe possibly. So that's not important. The important thing is we have 4 questions and we want to pound through those so Johnny Million can go on a run or something. Go do his Josh Hawley impersonation. His Josh Hall ass. And you got to take care of your kitty cat. Yeah, Chud came over, by the way.
3 left, I think.
Okay, great.
From Berkeley Dowd, which countries are providing the highest levels of support for the Ukrainian resistance currently?
The
U.S. and the Brits.
Yeah,
I would say, without a doubt, they're the biggest. Poland is in there, but by and large, it's the Brits and the Yanks.
All right, and
this latest announcement from the White House has been met with a lot of very enthusiastic support. The fact that they're going to get more HIMARS, it's been. I mean, I saw Zelensky tweeted out earlier today directly thanking POTUS.
Yeah.
So it's the Americans. We're we got a good ally in Ukraine after all this is said and done. They're going to be very thankful.
Well, and they're also going to be for, certainly, I guess technically they would be business deferential for us helping them exist, but also because we're not going to demand it. We earned it through being supportive of them having their own country. And none of us want
it's mutual. It's mutually beneficial.
Right. Exactly. So I personally think that's a lovely thing. So,
absolutely.
Fingers crossed sooner rather than later.
As two former colonial powers, we get where we're both coming from, and I think we'll have a good relationship.
Right. So let's grab another one real quick so we can.
Right, and then this one's really interesting. Are the January 6 hearings being reported there, and if so, what are they saying?
Very little. They're aware of it, but it's not the only reason they're paying very close. Well, the only reason they're paying any attention to it at all is because they are very much concerned about the midterms. And if the Republicans get back in power, there's concern that they will pull back in their support for Ukraine, because many Ukrainians do recognize that the GOP is less, I'm going to be very polite here, that the GOP is less inclined to help Ukraine and is more friendly towards the Kremlin than, say, the Biden administration or the Democrats are. So that's really the only that's the only way that it's on the radar here. They don't domestic politics in the United States. They respect as being domestic.
Right. Also, this week, just so people know, there was, I want to say 2 Americans, a Swede, and one other foreign fighter.
I love this joke. Did they walk into a bar?
You don't like this joke because they were killed in by tank fire.
This joke sucks.
Yeah, it's terrible. And they were fighting up in the Northeast, but they were pushing in behind enemy lines. These were guys who were effectively, either former Army Rangers or former Special Forces or working in that kind of stuff, retired and whatnot, and went there to fight because they can't stand what the Russians are doing. And they took a mission that was well into enemy lines and were successful in carrying out that battle for a good long while, but they were killed by tank fire. They're announcing.
The International Brigade is no joke. They are very active, particularly around Kharkiv.
Canadian. It was a Canadian.
Which is a very active. That's a very active battle zone, and the International Brigade is not for show. It's not. It's not just a press op. They really are out there fighting. I mean, when Malcolm Nance gets back, he will be part of an active combat unit. Whether or not he will be off the line as an intelligence officer, or whether or not he will be directly on the line, I'm not willing to talk about. But they're not joking. The International Brigade is there fighting on the front lines.
Right. Yeah.
So
there's another question, Johnny, I think that we hadn't hit yet.
Yeah, just the what is the thinking there of Hungary's Orban saying that Ukraine can't win the war because of the EU-US policy and action?
Yeah, Orban is not making any friends.
Anywhere.
Anywhere. They don't. There is concern. I will not lie. There is concern here in Ukraine about fracturing within the European Union. I think that's why we see a lot of talk coming out of Zelensky's office about him hoping that the war will be over by the end of the year. Not because of what the Ukrainians can withstand, or not because of, just a desire to end the war, but I think there is some realpolitik going on where they're like, will the alliance survive the winter? And we need the alliance. Right. We need people behind us. And Orban is not helping with that. And they're not, though. They're very much concerned about fracturing within the EU, and Orban is
See,
if there is going to be a divide within the EU,
it's going to come from him.
There's a good chance it'll start from there.
Right. I will say that this is also a time when the Orbans of the world, in terms of NATO, can feel because of the seriousness of the circumstance and their awareness of how the other countries, how seriously they're taking it, and also how the power dynamic might shift as Sweden and Finland are joining NATO, that this might be their last chance to negotiate some stuff for themselves by holding back support. So that's not that they're intending on a full fracture, but knowing that they do have bargaining chips, however limited in this situation. And quite frankly, Turkey's economy is kind of screwed right now. So that
and Hungary is going to Orban and Hungary are going to have to come to the realization that
they're next.
That they're on if they sidle up to Russia and Putin, they're on the losing side.
Right.
I think that might change things internally within Hungary, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
All right. I know that there are European Union, there are leaders within the EU who are already starting to say, like, hey, either, if you don't stand for what the rest of us stand for in terms of liberal democracy, which is the cornerstone of what the EU is supposed to be about, then are we really going to be participating with you in the Union? We might have to reassess whether or not Hungary deserves to be part of the EU. And if I'm Hungarian, that would give me pause.
There's a big difference between being the old, the British system, which has survived before on its own and thrived, in spite of the EU going the way of Brexit, which is definitely damaging to them, but not completely dysfunctional from their way. They're used to it. It's not that long ago. With Hungary, a forcible Brexit for them effectively would suck. It's different to leave the party. It's another thing to be kicked out, and the financial negotiation power you have.
Yeah, and Hungary does not have the city of London.
Yes. No. Right. I mean, Budapest is great. If you're a spy, apparently, it's a good place to meet up. And London has its pluses in terms of that as well. But there's nothing else going on.
It is one of the world's great economic centers. So even with a Brexit, they still have the city of London to fall back on. Hungary does not have anything
London, city
even
of sin,
remotely
city of
close
sin
to
that we grew up in. Right. Let's see. I think we got most of it. I think we got
one more.
I think we got them all.
We got them all. That's great.
Great.
I will say I'm going to let you go and thank you for joining us. Sorry about the technical aspects. It's very beautiful. I'm very jealous. You're very lucky. This is terrific. I'll
be back in the States shortly.
Well, yeah. Keep us posted, and then until then, you're welcome. So, and even then.
I think I might have one or two more Saturdays.
Oh, I have one last question.
Next Saturday might be my last one.
One last one. The A-10 Warthog. Sure. The belief that they're finally training up on and going to get the A-10 Warthog. Johnny, do you know what the A-10 Warthog is?
I ordered it once at the Outback, and it was too much.
Yeah, I don't believe that. I think you could finish it. I think you were just carbo loading
to get it for free.
That's true. That's I see. You're trying to game the system. Yeah, that's different.
I took it home. I finished it later.
Well, we all know that's true.
The blooming Warthog.
Yes, the blooming Warthog. So the A-10 Warthog. If you ever hear the brap flyover gunner ship that you'll sometimes hear in war footage and that kind of stuff. The A-10 is like people are pointing out in the chat called the tank killer.
It's a tank with wings. It's a gun. Yeah. It's a gun. It's a plane built around a gun, and then a tank built around a plane.
As opposed to building a really fast plane.
I've been in Afghanistan and seen the Warthog in action, and it is, my God, the power of the A-10 is incredible.
It is,
but
yeah.
There's a couple of things about the A-10. You have to have air dominance to have the A-10.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot have active surface-to-air missiles. You cannot have other enemy aircraft in the region because the A-10 flies very slow. It can take a lot of damage.
And it also can maneuver better.
I am 100% behind sending the A-10s over here. 100% behind them. But it's not going to be the HIMARS. It will not be the game changer that, say, the HIMARS were. But to have A-10s in the area, yes, absolutely, 100%.
Here's what I would argue is the point of the A-10 there. Is the A-10 is a cleanup weapon. Meaning you bomb an area, there are still troops in there. You don't want to destroy the infrastructure entirely because there are civilians and that kind of stuff. So you send in planes to do, instead of strafe bombing or dropping bombs, that fire on an area, which is much more accurate, but aimed at, it's an anti-personnel weapon. And it's also way more maneuverable. Even though it's not as fast, the tail can drift around. It can almost turn on a dime.
And it can take damage. And if you wanted to get artillery lines, because right now what they're using the HIMARS is they're using the HIMARS to strike well behind enemy lines to get their supply and command and control. If they sent in A-10s, the Warthogs would go in and actually destroy artillery units that are close up on the lines. That are then sending artillery ordnance against Ukrainian units, and it would be devastating. The A-10s would decimate artillery lines, and you would lose. We would lose. The Ukrainians would lose pilots. They would lose A-10s. People would die. It would not be like the HIMARS, where it's like we'll hide them, we'll bring them out when we need them. And then we'll shoot and we'll scoot and we'll keep them safe. The A-10s, you would lose A-10s.
Yes.
100%. People would be shot down.
The same way you lose a tank.
Ukrainian pilots would die, but they would be devastating. For every A-10 that was shot down, you would, in my estimation, you would be doing serious damage to the artillery lines of the Russians. And so,
also, right, and also depending on how close you are to the enemy lines with your own troops, it is a strong aircraft that even if it's shot down, ejection from it and saving yourself is easier than, say, a helicopter which falls like a stone, or a fast-moving jet fighter, which is very high up, and therefore you could land behind enemy lines and yada yada yada. There's the crew of an A-10 can get out in theory. Because it's so strong. The underbelly is meant to be shot at.
Yes, and the A-10 cockpit is basically, it's surrounded by the whole intention of the A-10 is you're protecting two things. You're protecting that gun, that 30 millimeter Gatling gun, which is what the plane is built around. It's just a platform for the gun. So protecting that, and then protecting the crew. And it's a tank. I've seen A-10s land in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've seen them come in and just be riddled with bullets. And they come in, they land, and crews get to work on salvaging them or scrapping them for service for other A-10s. But the thing is a flying tank. It would be a powerful weapon in the hands of the Ukrainians, and one that could be quite useful.
I would say that, and I read some of the Jane's stuff, like the defense stuff, because the idea is that, as someone who's against, in principle, the military-industrial complex, but also understands that security is a real thing, my radar is more tuned to that goes too far in the wrong direction. I like to be aware of the blue thundering of our of our internal security is one of the things that I'm concerned with. Military gear for civilian areas and that kind of stuff. And so I read those things to see if any of those things are drifting that way. One of the scariest things I have read in terms of military advancements, and there's a lot of them, besides like microwave rays and all kinds of stuff like that they've been talking about, is an A-10 drone. They've been talking about this for a while, and a drone version of the A-10 would be the most frightening. And the idea that they would crank out 20 of them and not lose a pilot, so therefore just make them. Just
that gun,
good
gun,
Lord.
that 30 millimeter Gatling gun is one of the most awesome, devastating weapons I've ever seen.
It's crazy.
In operation and combat. It's
right.
just, it
brutal.
tears stuff up. And it's been great. It's been great for the U.S. forces in the fights, in the wars that we've had post 9/11. But we've never utilized the A-10 in a theater of combat where the opposition has means to shoot it down properly.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so, I mean, that's why I say, as enthusiastic as I am for having the A-10 sent over here, I'd rather have them here than mothballed, which is what I think that they're talking about, mothballing the majority of the fleet of A-10s. I'd rather have them here. But I'm under no illusion that you would lose pilots,
right?
You would lose planes. The Russians would shoot down A-10s. But it's like having helicopters. It's like having tanks. You're in a war. You're in combat. There are going to be losses,
right?
But it would be devastating to their artillery lines.
As much as I'm enjoying the armchair quarterbacking as well, this is a great conversation or whatever. I don't want to keep Johnny any longer than I have to. And the sun is going down behind you in a beautiful, beautiful way. We will discuss this on the Wednesday show. I have no doubt.
Sure.
And we'll go into it. Congress hates the A-10. Yeah, I agree. But they know what it can do. And they know they're aware. The ones that matter are aware of its
The
worth.
infantry loves the A-10.
Exactly.
The
so
military
many lives. That's when they call in air support. That's what they're hoping for. Nobody is real, especially when they're close. They don't want a jet fighter coming by and napalming an area or something like that. What they want is the A-10 to come in and be very specific. So that is what it is good for. That's it. It's just. Again, I think it's a cleanup weapon after they know they've expended all the anti-aircraft stuff, and that's what drones are for. You send the drones in, they use up all their anti-aircraft stuff on the drones, and then the A-10s come in and clean up. It's a strategy. It would work. I'm just saying, but we're all very smart everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So
until they get punched in the nose. That's right.
Respectfully, I will defer to those things. Love you.
Well, thanks
love you, Johnny
everybody
Million.
for listening to my gobbledygook, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday. Take care, Johnny. Good to see you.
Cheers. I may have another way for you to link up, Philip, on Wednesday. I may have another way. I'll send you a link this week.
Sure.
That makes it better. So, cheers.
Sure.
Thanks.
Take
Thanks
care,
a lot.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.